Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again. Another chapter from our zombie story titled 50 Days After the Apocalypse, written by Rupert Rollinson. Remember to check out the links in the description, show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 7. Amy moaned as she regained consciousness. The pounding on her head deafened her to any surrounding noise. The girl made to move her hands to her head, only to discover they were bound by a coarse rope. Slowly, Amy opened her eyes. For a moment, she was blinded by a source of light. Blinking a couple times, her sight came back, and the girl took stock of her surroundings. She was laying flat on her back, hands and legs tied. The room she was in appeared to have been an office similar to the one she had been ambushed in, the only source of light coming from the cracks in boards covering the windows. Rolling onto her side, Amy searched the room for her companion. Instead of John, she saw a group of 4 people, similarly bound, huddled in a corner. The eldest girl was about 19 years old, and had shoulder-length dark brown hair in a bowl-style cut. Like most survivors, her clothes were splattered with the usual gore and tears. Just under her right eye were 3 gruesome, unhealed scars that twisted her face to an angry scowl. Hidden slightly behind her were 2 children, twins, probably 5 years old. A boy and a girl. They looked similar to the eldest girl, suggesting they were related. The last girl was slightly separated from the group. Her long ginger hair was tied back in a ponytail. She was 14 or 15 though. It was clear to see she was a bit small for her age. With a flash of recognition, Amy realized the girl was the one who had been screaming. Rolling onto her other shoulder, Amy saw the boy who had knocked her out, leaning on the wall next to a door, his wooden board propped up next to him. As if sensing she was looking at him, the boy's eyes snapped open, locking onto her. Amy was happy to see the boy subconsciously shift his leg to shield his crotch. Suddenly, the door burst open as John was thrown through it. He was strapped to a wheelie chair and was covered in fresh cuts and bruises. Then, a man, the same man who had ambushed him, strode through the shattered remains of the door, panting. He was of average height, bald, sweat covered his dark skin. Whatever he had been doing to John, he'd worked up a sweat doing it. Yeah, you're a tough one, I'll give you that. In response, Amy saw her companion spit blood onto the ground. The man laughed before turning to the boy. Check the rope, boy. Fetch me a beer while you're at it. And with that, the man turned and left through the door. The boy crouched down next to John, quickly unstrapping him from the chair and tying him up in a similar fashion to the others before grabbing a nearby sack from off the ground. The clinking of the sack as the boy left the room was the only sound in the safe, John's deep breathing. With their guards gone, Amy crawled over to her companion. John's face was a bloody mess, and every few breaths he coughed up more blood. What's happening, John? What do they want? They want to know where we got all the food from. Whatever you do, don't tell them. We're good as dead the moment they find out. Amy gave a little nod of confirmation. For a while, the two of them lay in silence, where John eventually slipped into unconsciousness. Confident he wasn't about to die lying there, Amy crawled over to the others in the room, hoping to find out just what was going on. Bound as she was, it took several minutes for the girl to travel the length of the room, and she finally made it. Amy slowly propped herself up against the wall, wincing as her strained body screamed at being moved. Looking the eldest girl in the eye, she began to speak. So, do you want to start, or should I go first? The name's Helen, and these two are James and Jane. The traitor over there is Sarah. I'm Amy, and the guy over there is John. The young boy scurried out from behind Helen, moving over to Amy. James, get back here, the eldest girl said, hooking her legs in front of the infant and pulling him back. Amy looked at the eldest girl. She pushed James behind her. Yeah, can't be too careful. So, who are our captors? Well, the guy who was beating up your friend is Ian. He's an abusive alcoholic whose moods change so much he's just as likely to offer you a drink as he is to slap you. The younger one's Dan, his son. He does whatever Daddy tells him and may as well be mute. Despite her insulting words, Helen kept her voice low, keen not to be overheard. The two of them lapsed into an uncomfortable silence. Searching for a topic to talk about, Amy's eyes once again fell upon the scars on her right cheek. So, what caused the, She fell momentarily silent, search for the right words. Oh, you mean these scars? It happened on the first day. We had been staying with my boyfriend when he woke the three of us up. He had turned. That morning, he broke down the kitchen door while I was still working out. What was going on? He killed our mother, left me these, the going away present. So, I had to break up with him. Thought he was getting, too clingy. How'd you do it? Amy asked in a whisper. Well, I brained him with a rolling pin I was using to make his breakfast. In the hour that followed, the two of them told their stories of how they got here, with Helen every now and then having to nudge James with her feet to keep him in line. The trio had apparently spent the first month roaming around similarly to Amy and John. Then, a couple of weeks ago, had been caught by Ian and Dan. After that, Helen had been used to find supplies, with the twins being used as hostages to ensure her cooperation. Amy had to marvel at the strength the woman showed, being sent out into that madness alone, and returning to the men, forcing her to do it. To be able to do that day after day and remain sane was incredible. Then it was Amy's turn. He talked about the first day and the days that followed. He talked about John's treatment of the other survivors, of Andrew Roberts, of the supermarket, everything. Halfway through her narrative, John regained consciousness. He crawled over to the group of survivors and sat quietly next to Amy. It was after dusk when Dan reappeared in the room. Without speaking, he moved over to John's pack, pulling out a loaf of stale bread and an assortment of cans. That was when Ian stumbled, reeking of alcohol and knife in hand. With uneven steps, he made his way over to Sarah. In response, the girl drew her legs in and pushed herself further into the wall. But it was no use. Ian grabbed her by her waist, her wrist, and hoisted her to her feet. Sarah let out a whimper as Ian held the quivering knife in front of her face. Look, quit your struggling before I stab you on the other side. Sarah became stock still, her eyes filled with terror. Slowly, the drunken man lowered the knife and cut away the rope binding the girl before shoving her towards Dan. Then, Ian moved over to Amy. As his hand reached out, John moved forwards, putting himself between him. If I were you, brat, I'd move. Now, unless you want another beating like earlier. A sick smile spread across Ian's face as he spoke, but John looked him straight in the eyes and smiled the same twisted smile back. So I have all my teeth, don't I? The punch hit John right in the mouth, knocking John back to the floor. Amy watched as her companion coughed several times and spat out a tooth with a fresh patch of blood. Not anymore. John looked up at the drunk man. I've got plenty more. The second punch slammed the man back to the floor, causing him to cough up more blood and spittle covering the floor. Defiant as ever, John made to get up before a pair of tied up hands were softly laid on his shoulder, holding him down. It's okay. It's okay. Amy's voice was soft and didn't betray the fear she felt. Ian's hand once again reached over, grabbing the ropes, binding the girl, and pulling her to her feet. The knife slashed once again, and the ropes were severed. Alright, you get to cooking. Then came the cooking. To Amy's delight, the group had a pair of portable cookers and plenty of fuel to use. She had to admit, the difficult part was trying not to drool at the thought of eating hot food as she scraped the congealed contents of a can into a small melting pot. As she and Sarah set about cooking an eatable, Ian dragged the chair John had been tortured in over to the corner. Sitting down in it, he proceeded to produce a can of beer from one of his coat's many pockets. Dan, for his part, leaned against the wall next to his board. Amy let out a curse as the knife she was being forced to use to stir what she believed was a casserole scraped against the bottom of the metal bowl. She and the other girl had been slaving over the dish for over half an hour, and the almost constant metallic sound was starting to get on her nerves. Despite this, the dish looked palatable. It was practically Michelin compared to the slop she and John had been eating the past weeks. While every now and then before day 0, Amy had managed to cook something that was at least edible, she had to admit it was the young girl and her quiet instructions that were the main reason the dish was so good. Another scrape dragged Amy's wandering mind back to the present. Letting out another stream of curses, the girl removed the implement, deftly weighing it as she debated whether or not to charge Ian with it. It won't work. The words were so quiet that Amy almost missed them. Looking at the girl, he saw her continuing to labor over the soup. Without looking up, the girl spoke again. Got a gun. Won't help him if I'm quick. Sarah smirked, though she made sure to keep her face down so Ian couldn't see. I thought that, right up until he grabbed the knife out of my hand and stabbed me with it. Now, you use that to trap unsuspecting survivors, huh? The girl recoiled slightly at the comment, but not enough to draw attention to their conversation. Oh, sorry about that. He does that every time Helen doesn't find food, you know. Still, it's not an excuse. The conversation ended with that, as the two cooked in silence. Amy had to admit that Sarah was very skilled at cooking, quickly cutting off any spoiled parts of ingredients or adding them to broth. Everything was going smoothly till Sarah went to pick up the pot. The strain from lifting the container was too much for her wound, and the girl's arms gave out. With a loud bang, the pot fell to the floor, spilling half of the contents all over the floor. Ian swore loudly, storming over to the pair and dragging Sarah to her feet by her hair. Amy acted on instinct, grabbing the knife firmly in her hands. She rose to her feet, preparing to stab the drunk. The knife was halfway to ending Ian's life when it was knocked from her hand by her own cricket bat. Turning, the girl saw Dan holding on to the weapon, prepared to back his father up. Amy instead dived sideways, shoulder barging the boy into the wall. Dan coughed, winded but still able to fight as he turned the cricket bat and slammed its side on to the back of his hands, or to back of his attacker's leg. Amy fell back off balance, but made sure not to leave an opening for a follow-up attack. That's enough. Ian getting the attention of the two combatants. He was stood with Amy's dropped knife pressing against Sarah's neck. Amy thought about continuing her fight. After all, this was the same girl that had led to her and John's capture. Her resolve crumbled though, when she saw Ian draw blood. Amy's shoulder dropped and she held out her hands, allowing Dan to tie them up again. Then something strange happened. The boy picked up the cricket bat and marched over to his father. "Let her go," Dan said, in a deeper voice than you would have thought, given his age. Ian paused for a moment, clearly not used to his son challenging him and unsure what to do. Finally, giving in, the man threw Sarah to the floor and picked up the pot. "Not like I care anyways. Your portion she spilled anyway. Now go check and see if any of the creatures were drawn by the sound." Dan stayed motionless for a moment longer before tying up Sarah and leaving to do as his father asked. Sarah crawled back into her corner while Amy made her way back over to the group, taking a seat next to John. Sorry I couldn't break us out." Amy half joked to her companion, who merely smiled and sent her smile back. "Don't be, because I found our ticket out of here." And that, ladies and gentlemen, the end of our chapter.